Good morning to one half of it looks more like 3/4 of the greatest group of people in all the world. There's not 20 empty seats out there. This is a packed house this morning. That's exciting. Well, happy Father's Day to all of you dads. It is a joy to be a father most of the time. And we are so appreciative to all of our fathers. In fact, today's lesson I've entitled, Thank You, Dad. And when I think about what it means to be a father, well, first of all, I want to get a couple things out of the way. I'm excited because one of my children is here today, my daughter Reagan, who had a shower yesterday, and y'all showered her with gifts. I walked in the room and I was a little floored as I tripped over things, but I was able to catch myself on a tower of presents. So it was all good. So thank you so much. But also I want you to meet after services Brad and Susan Hall. Brad was one of the elders I served under at the Sherrod Avenue Church of Christ in Florence, Alabama for the years that we were there. And they're dear, dear friends and like grandparents to our children. So hope you'll meet them. When I think of dads, I have to naturally think of my own dad. And there are memories, there are certain things that you always associate with your father if you had a good relationship with your dad. For me, my dad wasn't big into sports. In fact, I think he'd come to my Little League games and afterwards he'd say, "You did great." And I'd be like, "Dad, I struck out 3 times. "Oh, is that bad?" I mean, that's almost how my dad is. That's just not his thing. But man, he can bowl. He can bowl. But sports, that's not really his thing. But he would fish a little bit, never hunt. But my daddy would take me to every new movie that came out that was appropriate for a kid. And it was kind of our thing to do. And to this day, I cannot hear a John Williams theme song without the first thing going through my mind being my dad and those good times. You know, dun, 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 dun. I think of Superman, but I also think of my dad. You know, or Star Wars theme. I think of R2-D2 and Han Solo, but I also think of my dad. And especially dun, 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 dun. I remember sitting in the theater in every single one of those epic movies of the 70s and 80s, and my dad right there with me. And afterwards, I'd be like, "That was the greatest." And he was okay. It would have been better if it was black and white. I mean, he would say things like that. "Well, it ain't John Wayne," you know, that kind of thing. But what a time that was. And I cherish it. And whenever I've gone to the movies with my family, I always think back on those good times, and so many others. And then as a father, you get kind of the other side of that coin. You know, I remember going to all of my boys' ball stuff and trying to coach him, even though sometimes I didn't know anything about the sport. So I'd do what all preachers do to fix every problem. I'd read a book about it. And then I'd work with him through it. And we have such precious memories. With Reagan, when we lived in California, you know, dads sometimes got to break the rules for their kids. And we had season passes at Six Flags Marine World, which was just a half an hour away from our house. And she was so excited to ride all of those big kid rides, you know, the roller coasters and the loop-de-loops and all of that. But they have this ridiculous height requirement. I mean, it's ridiculous, but I guess they don't want kids to slide out when they're going upside down. But you know, she was only about that much too short. But I'm telling you, those ride people are sticklers about it. I mean, we'd even go up sometimes and I'd kind of grab under her armpits and kind of lift her a little bit. And they'd say, "Sir, you need to step back and let us measure her." I mean, they were like the ride Nazis. But so we get there. So we found this way we got the biggest heeled shoes we could find for a little girl. Remember? And you could put like cloth and paper in there. And so we'd stretch her out and she'd get on the ride, and then afraid she'd slip out, I'd hold her really tight through the whole thing. And I mean, we ride them over and over and over. What a time. Being a father is an honor like no other. A privilege like no other. But having a father may be a greater honor. And so today, dads, we say thank you. Well, the truth is that in some ways, at this time, fathers are a little bit behind the curve in the eyes of our society. In some ways, they're out of favor. Our culture questions the importance of dads in the family unit. Now, in this, we're not just simply parroting traditional roles or values, although I think those are good and holy and healthy. But what we're talking about is just the importance of a father figure. And even that is being dismissed. I remember when the girls were little, they loved to watch all the shows on the Disney Channel. And generally, those shows were wholesome, especially the cartoon ones. They were usually the best, the cleanest. But there was one particular show called The Proud Family. And in this cartoon, it depicted a kind of a typical American family. But the thing that always bothered me, and eventually I stopped allowing them to watch it, is I'd walk through, and every single time, you'd see the mom who was so together and so intelligent and so ambitious, and she was the solver of all problems, and the daddy was the comedic relief and was the cause of all problems. Now, I'm okay with a dad being comedy relief. If I wasn't, I'd be a little hypocritical in our home. But a daddy should also, at times, be a rock and be solid. And so society, in some ways, and I think that show was just a kind of a hint of a depiction of how the role of a father is being diminished in its importance. But the Bible repeatedly, over and over, is clear as it stresses the importance of both a mama and a daddy in the home. In fact, when we look over in Proverbs chapter 1, verses 8 and 9, as he's introducing this book of wisdom, this life lesson, this life coaching, if you will, he's going to start and he says, "My son," in verse 8, "hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother, for they will be graceful ornaments on your head and chains about your neck." He says, don't reject the instruction, the teaching of your dad and the rules and the instruction of your mama. He said, because all of your life, they'll bless you if you don't turn away from those things, if you don't ignore them. There was a song came out a few years ago, called Voices. And it was kind of a clever play, as a lot of songs are, because the chorus is, "I hear voices all the time." And he starts off, "You might think I'm a little bit crazy or think I'm insane, because I hear voices. My dad's saying, quit that job and you'll throw your life away. Or quit that team and, you'll always be a quitter the rest of your life. Grandma telling me to when I find the one, I better treat her right." So the play on words is, I hear voices all the time. That they're the voices of my mama and my daddy and my granddad and my grandmama. Because those words of instruction and wisdom are an ornament on my life. And guide me through when I need. Do you ever hear the voices? It's funny, but the times I hear my daddy's voice the most are the times when I really need to. It's strange how that works. They're the times when I'm having to make a decision and I'm leaning towards maybe not the best decision. And the instruction of my father and my mother are right there with me. Right there with me. In fact, the Bible speaks to the benefit of having a dad in the home, even if that daddy isn't a believer. In 1 Corinthians 7, 13 and 14, it says, "And a woman who has a husband who does not believe." So here we've got a lady who's a Christian. She's married to an unbeliever. And in that time, in Corinth, he would have been a pagan idol worshiper, most likely. Because that's what the society, they were Greek culture. They grew up with the Greek pantheon of gods. So we're talking a person who's not just a little bit not a Christian. We're talking about she's married to a pagan. So some might assume, well, surely God wouldn't want the woman married to and those children being in the home of a person who's worshiping Zeus and worshiping all of the pantheon of pagan gods. But listen to what it says. A woman who has a husband who does not believe, if she's willing to live with her, let her not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but now they are holy. So he says there, it's healthy for your kids to have that daddy in the home. Now, of course, he doesn't mean a daddy who's abusive or a daddy who is endangering them. No. But granted, if this is a daddy who has the natural, normal love for his family, his wife and his children, even if he's an unbeliever, even if he were an idol worshiper, God says, it's better for those kids to have that daddy. He says it's better for you to have that husband under those circumstances. So the Bible is plain in its insistence that both a mama and a daddy are the best way for children to be raised, the best environment for them to be reared. Studies have shown that kids from fatherless homes, now there are exceptions. When we generalize, like we use statistics and we generalize, we have to be careful not to state that it's always this way. Because some of you will be the exception to the rule. You'll be the outlier. Some of you know the exception to the rule, the outliers. So in no way are we implying that this is true in every single situation or every single circumstance. But studies have found that kids from fatherless homes are more prone, not every time, but more prone to running away, to behavioral disorder, to violence, to dropping out of school, alcohol abuse, and even somewhat higher rates of suicide. And again, it shows us the wisdom of Scripture about the importance of a powerfully strong family unit in which children should be raised. So today, in what little time we have left, I want us to recognize how much each and every one of us owe to our dads. Dads who were godly, dads who were loving, dads who put us first. They are important, first of all, to raise well-adjusted children. A researcher by the name of Dr. David Popenoe writes that a father's presence in the home improves a child's skills in both math and reading. Statistically, he did studies. He also writes that a dad's presence in the home is important because and this was, I never even thought of this, but until I read it, and he says it encourages play, which is vital to the healthy development of young people. What that means is, and most of you probably know this, in your home, typically, now it's not always true, again, exceptions to the rule, but typically you got a mama and your daddy, and who's the more the cut up? You know, who's the one who wrestles in the floor with the kids? And who's the one who makes dad jokes? Duh! And it's just the role of a dad. And he, in his writing, Popenoe says, I found that this is, intrinsically imperative to the healthy development of a person because this shows several things. It accomplishes several things. It promotes self-control and teamwork. You see, when you're wrestling, and I wrestled with my kids, we played a game called The Claw. Reagan, we can play that again today if you want. The Claw. And, the claw, if anything touched it, the claw grabbed hold and it didn't let go for anything. And they'd pull away, Daddy, and they'd start crying. And then as soon as they got away, I'd just set my hand down and they'd start inching closer to the claw again, And I'm like, this is not wisdom. See, so the game was teaching them wisdom. If you get bit, don't go back for more. It didn't take, it seems, but still. But that play, it teaches cooperation. It also teaches self-control because, when dad's wrestling on the floor, there's certain things that you do and there's certain things you don't. You don't kick. And it teaches control. You see, that fun, that play is a natural part of childhood. It's a natural part of development that's supposed to be brought on. Also, a father is unique. Now, mamas can discipline too. I could tell you stories in our home, and Reagan could as well. Mamas can discipline too. But daddies are an essential part of well-adjusted, happy children, because fathers have typically shouldered the responsibility of disciplinarian. And it is not always fun. Amen, daddies? It is, in fact, it is never fun. Discipline is training. Discipline is not abuse. It is training. Now, sometimes the one being disciplined feels like it's the worst thing in the world, and effective discipline kind of has that impact. Because effective discipline is to deter behavior and to mold towards better behavior. Teaching children right from wrong and wisdom from foolishness. That's what it does. That's why that text in Hebrews 7, if you endure chastening, verse 7 through 10, God deals with you as sons. For what son is there who a father does not chasten? But if you're without chastening, of which you have become partakers, then you're illegitimate and you're not sons. Daddies who don't love their kids do not train them. And daddies who do the hard thing and train them for life. Well-adjusted life. Furthermore, we have human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? I received a lot of spankings when I was growing up. A lot. A lot. And my daddy wasn't consistent in his method. I mean, there was the hand, and then there was stage 2, DEFCON 2, which was the belt. And then there was DEFCON 3, nuclear tragedy, go cut your own switch. And I'm so grateful, because he taught me to be a well-adjusted person. And never, when my daddy lifted hand, DEFCON 2 belt, DEFCON 3 switch, or whatever it may be, never did I think he didn't love me. I thought maybe he hated me and loved me at the same time. Never. But I know it worked, because later on, after about the age of 12 or so, he never pulled his belt. He never made me cut a switch. And he did discipline, but what I hated worse, I would have taken a switch or a belt any day of the week over that look. You know the look? The eyes that speak more than words. The expression that says, "You've disappointed me so much." You see, fathers help to produce well-adjusted kids through discipline. I've been trying to exercise more, take a little better care of myself. And so this morning, I got up before I got ready to come to church, and I went and I did a little run. Well, kind of more walk than run. A little bit of run, a lot of walk. But still, around the neighborhood, and I took my dog. And here, sometimes I was running, and most of the time I was walking, and she just kept pace. A limp leash. She didn't pull. She just right there with me. Usually looking up at me the whole time. If she wasn't looking at another dog, then she was looking back up at me. Thank goodness there was no food in the path. But what had occurred to me, since I knew I'd be preaching on this today, is that I was happy. And she was happy. Because we were keeping pace with one another. You see, a dog that hasn't been disciplined won't keep pace. It'll pull you here, it'll pull you there, and it's frustrated too, because it really wants whatever it's trying to sniff or trying to eat or trying to attack. It really wants those things. And so you're resisting it, and it's constant tension, constant resistance. But because she's been disciplined, and that discipline was tough. Maybe not as tough as disciplining my kids, but I didn't like those early years using the e-collar. If you don't know what that means, translation, shock collar. Or the pinch pinch collar that caused her to, if she lagged behind when we walked, it pinched her neck and she had to come up and run close to me. Those were not fun times for her. They were not fun times for me. But the rest of her life now, not once today did I pull on that leash. Not once today did she pull me this way or that way. Because the discipline produced that she and I were in pace. And when I ran, she kept pace. And when I walked, she kept pace. And had I crawled, she would have kept pace. She would have been doing this the whole time, but she would have kept pace. And you see, discipline teaches our children to keep pace with life. Discipline produces kids that can keep up, that can move forward, and have the discipline to control themselves, to do what they should do, not just everything they want to do. Fathers, that's your responsibility. And I'm grateful that I had a father who took that on. By the way, that was not an endorsement of using shock collars on your children. The second thing, not only do we owe them for raising well-adjusted children, but fathers are important to instruct children about how to be men and how to be women. Boys learn through apprenticeship. They watch and they model. But in fact, there's been a lot of studies that have been done on the different ways that boys and girls learn. They're very different. In fact, our classroom model really suits girls much better than boys. Boys learn by doing, by watching, by modeling after. And they just naturally do it. A song came out years ago called, "I've Been Watching You." And this depicted, he says he's driving along in his truck and he slammed on his brakes and his kid's Happy Meal went everywhere, 4-year-old's Happy Meal. And when he did, he slipped a 4-letter word, the little boy, and he said, "Where'd you learn that?" He said, "Dad, I've been watching you." Dad, ain't that cool? I'm your buckaroo. I just want to be like you. I eat all my food and grow as tall as you are. We like cowboy boots and camo pants. Yeah, we're just alike. Ain't we, Dad? I want to do everything you do. I've been watching you. That same song came out when Seth was 7 years old. And it was that same year that my brother from another mother, Jonathan, was visiting, Uncle Jonathan. And we were all sitting around the table, and he went around. You remember Reagan? He went around and asked everybody, all you kids, "What are you guys going to do when you grow up?" And Rianne, she said, "I'm going to be a doctor." She got close, not quite, but that's what she wanted to be. Reagan said, "I want to be a lawyer." And Seth was eating his food. And he said, "Seth, what do you want to do when you grow up?" And he just looked at him like, "Duh." He said, "I'm going to be the preacher at Sherrod Avenue and teach karate on Thursday nights." Well, guess what I taught every Thursday night at the church building? And I will never forget it. That's what little boys do. They need a great role model that they can imitate. Not just listen to, not just learn from. And this whole thing, do what I say and not what I do, it doesn't work for fathers, especially with their little boys. But when it comes to little girls, daughters learn from their father things they cannot learn from their mother. Cannot. They learn how to trust a man who is trustworthy. And little girls need that in this world. They need to learn how to know what a trustworthy man looks like. They learn what kind of man is trustworthy. They learn how to appreciate their femininity and what real masculinity, not this bravado, over-the-top masculinity that's portrayed in the world, but real masculinity with humility and tenderness combined with strength. What that's supposed to look like. And they learn that it's possible for a man to love them completely and unselfishly. And he teaches them that they're worthy of love. How many fewer problems would we have with young ladies if they all felt that they were worthy of love? He teaches us how to be men, how to be women. And finally, we're in debt to our fathers because the Father teaches us through His example, and His example, His faith can ensure God's blessings in our lives. Now, this is the part that I've never preached before, but I've been studying it some, and it's just blown my mind as I've seen example after example, that the godly example of a father simply cannot be discounted, because he should teach his kids to love the Lord. Remember Deuteronomy 6, teach them as you go this way and that way, and as you're in your home, and write it on your doorpost, and all these things. And it says what they're teaching them is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So he should teach them, but it goes beyond teaching. Because Exodus chapter 20, we read in verses 4 through 6, and this is the giving of the 10 Commandments. It says, you shall not make for yourself carved image, any likeness thereof. And then verse 5, and you shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I'm the Lord your God. I'm a jealous God, visiting iniquity to the fathers on the children of the third and fourth generation, and those who hate me. Verse 6, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. Now, it's simply expressing a basic truth we know of life, is that a father's virtues or a father's sins will impact their children's lives. How many people live in problems that are generational? They live in poverty because their parents lived in poverty and their grandparents lived in poverty. Or they live in irresponsibility because their father was irresponsible and their grandfather was irresponsible. Or you can go on. Or abuse, because of abuse after abuse. You see it over and over and over. And what God's trying to express to them is that if you live in a way that is not noble and good, it will impact your children in a powerfully negative way. It will impact them, and it will have a detriment upon their life. But in the text, did you notice that the opposite is even more true? He said 3 or 4 generations in the first verse, but then he said, but to the 1,000th generation I will bless the children of those who love me and diligently seek me. In 1 Kings 11, 9 through 13, this is an interesting text. It says, so the Lord became angry with Solomon. Solomon had turned away from God. He had worshipped pagan idols, even though he was the son of the man after God's own heart, David. Because his heart had turned from the Lord. And he commanded him concerning this thing that he should not go after other gods, but he did. And he did not keep what the Lord had commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this and have not kept my covenant, my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. But then listen, nevertheless, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father, David. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will give him one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. Do you hear what God is saying? He's saying to a man who has totally turned away from him and rejected him, and his children and his children's children, who are going to be just as bad or worse, most of them, with just a very few exceptions in Judah. He says to them, I'm really angry, but I'm not going to pour out the fullness of my wrath on you, not because of anything you've done or deserved, but because I love your father, and your father loved me. You see, God will bless the children of a godly father, even if those children aren't godly. That's what both of those passages teach. That's how much God treasures a father who loves him with all of his heart. Because God knows. God knows that those who love him The thing we love next to Him most in all the world is our children. Well, all of these things being true, we have seen the ideal. And we should shoot for the ideal. But we do not live in a world of ideals. What if there is no father in the home? That happens all too frequently. Well, the first thing we have to remember is who God is at His essence. Psalm 68, 4-6. Sing to God, sing His praises, extol Him with the chorus. By His name, Yah, and rejoice before Him. For He is a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, a God of holy habitation. A God sets the solitary in families, and He brings out those who are bound into prosperity. Father to the fatherless. Remember the role God wants to have in your children's lives. And secondly, other men can and should step in. Children need a mama in their life, and they need a fatherly role model. And it could be a grandfather, it could be an uncle, it could be a family friend who's a mentor. But mamas, if you don't have a daddy in your children's lives, seek out grandparents, a granddaddy, an uncle. Seek out good men from the church who could be that picture, who can fill that void. And men, we need to be willing to step up to that role. So to all of our dads, we say this morning, thank you. Thank you. You know, as I look back on my daddy, I think the thing that meant the most to me is that he loved me through times when I was unlovable. I've said some things to my dad when I was young and foolish and struggling that I would give any amount that I have to take back. And to have never said to him, I remember one fight in the yard when I was about 17. And the things that I said to him, and he's never brought it up since. Never. But I know they hurt him so deep. And I've tried to make up for it. And I so wish I could take it back. But my daddy loved me through it. And you see, I wouldn't be who I am today. I wouldn't stand here before you. I wouldn't have a family, a wife, and children I love of my own if I hadn't had a father to whom I owed all of those things. This morning, perhaps there's a man here who, looking at the Word of God this morning, you want to be more of a father than you've been. Or perhaps there's a wife here today that hasn't appreciated the role of her husband enough. Or children who haven't appreciated their daddy enough. If we can help you, if we can encourage you, pray for you, whatever it is that you need, come right now as we stand and as we sing.